I know you guys like shipping and logistics, but do you like to snack? If so, the host of the Shipping Pod has a brand new podcast. Fast snacks, fast food, fast reviews. Snack Masters Inc., a podcast served to you in 30 minutes or less. Available now at snackmastersinc.com, iTunes, Google Play, and everywhere podcasts are heard. Enjoy Season 2 of The Shipping Pod.
Prepare for takeoff, please.
It's The Shipping Pod. Season 2. Hello and welcome to The Shipping Pod. I am your host, Tim Dooner. And guys, thanks for coming back on Season 2. We've been off to a great start. We've been talking about the Jones Act. We've been talking about consulting. And today, we're going to talk about a topic that concerns me quite a bit because I don't think we hear enough of it. We read articles about it, we read influencers talking about it, but when you go boots on the ground, when you walk inside a lot of 3PLs and freight forwarders, I'm not seeing people with their heads on fire yet. And I think I come at this from a unique perspective. My guest today is none other than Brian McNelis, Senior Vice President of Music and Soundtracks at Lakeshore Pictures. Brian and I go a long way back. He's the first person to give me a real job within this industry. And I came on to the record label that we were at, which was not Lakeshore. It was a small indie label in Southern California, right at the time that Napster and digital downloads were hitting. And we could see this massive sea change coming. Or at least I could. I was just out of college. I had downloaded plenty of MP3s illegally in school. I was very familiar with Napster. I was very familiar with Kazaa, Morpheus, other services that were coming up and coming down the pipeline. And at the time, the only thing that was really limiting people from downloading as many files as they wanted was broadband limits. Broadband wasn't widespread yet. These services themselves were kind of spotty. People could name files whatever they want. There wasn't a great voting system on which file was which. But slowly but surely, that all changed. And to me, it's very reminiscent of something that we're about to experience in this industry and we're starting to experience. And it's things like digital freight matching, the Uberization of freight, autonomous vehicles, technology taking over where people used to be, where 3PLs used to be, where 4PLs used to be or currently are, and 3PLs currently are, even where carriers currently are, as you see consolidation in there. As tech comes in and encroaches on those jobs, we are going to see a massive shift. A huge shift, and it seems like every time disruption comes through, when it went through music, oh, that's just music. Then when it went through film, well, that's just film, that's entertainment. And then it went through the taxi and the medallion industry, and well, that's just Uber, there's a better way. But if you're sitting there and you're thinking, there's not a better way to do freight, I have news for you. The world is about to change. And what Brian is going to lead us through in this conversation, when I call him in just a second here, is what it was like being boots on the ground at the start of a digital revolution that aggressively attacked his industry. And being with Lakeshore, they're a division of Paramount. So they don't just do music. He's been hit from all sides. They also do film. So when file sharing sites and torrent sites and mega upload and things like that came up, he was getting hit from all side. So he's going to talk to us a bit about that, how you survive that kind of thing, how you change your business model, especially when services like Spotify come around that rapidly change the industry. And to parallel that, if you look at our industry, digital freight matching isn't that different than Spotify. It's taking a process, it's computerizing it, simplifying rates. Your customers may not always need you. So what I implore you, if you're listening, is to take heed of what he says and then do a little research on some of the technologies that are coming up and that are out there that you can grasp onto. Before I call them, a couple plugs. This is The Shipping Pod. You can reach us at theshippingpod.com. That's where all of our old back episodes are. We're on Twitter at The Shipping Pod, Instagram at The Shipping Pod. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, all of the social sites, except for Snapchat. I don't know. I think I'm just a little bit too old for Snapchat. Maybe that's hypocritical too, because this is a show about digital disruption and freight disruption and music disruption and the way technology becomes a part of our lives, our jobs, and can alter our livelihood. Let's get Brian on the horn and let's talk about some downloads. Let's talk about Napster. Let's talk about the history of digital disruption in music and film and what it may mean for you as a shipper, a buyer, a carrier, a broker, or a freight forwarder.
Joining me today is the Senior Vice President of Music and Soundtracks at Lakeshore Entertainment, Brian McNelis, a man I've known for more than half my life now. Brian, thank you for joining us from California. How are you today?
I'm good. That's spooky. More than half your life. I'm not feeling younger. But that's awesome.
It's true, though, man. I did an internship for you guys back when I was 18, my first year of college. And that was, all the way back in, not to date ourselves, but the late 90s, 1998. And then you had the misfortune of giving me my first 9-to-5 job. But we're both in different places now. You moved on to Lakeshore Entertainment from the indie label that we were at back in the day. And what are you guys up to right now? Because I follow you on Facebook and on Instagram, and I've seen some of the awesome things that you post, some of the shows that I watch, and some of the movies that I'm really into. So what are you guys up to?
Well, fittingly, we've had the October from Hell. It's been an incredibly robust month. We have the second season of Stranger Things, releasing the follow-up record from the composers Kyle Dixon and Michael Stein, the two-time Grammy-nominated, Emmy-winning composers of Stranger Things, for the second season soundtrack. We released the first ever score album in the 7-8 year history of The Walking Dead for Bear McCreary this month. We reissued on vinyl. Well, we reissued on all formats, vinyl kind of being the crown jewel, but we reissued Hellraiser for its 30th anniversary on vinyl in all formats. We went back to the 24-track masters, remixed, remastered under the direction of legendary composer Christopher Young. On Friday, we released the record to Jigsaw, which was #1 domestic box office title for the weekend. That's just kind of the top line, down in the weeds, not even down in the weeds. We did our first record with Randy Newman for the Meyerowitz Stories, which is a Netflix film by Noah Baumbach. It's the first ever solo piano score to a motion picture by Randy Newman, who has 20 Academy Award nominations. For those of you keeping score at home, Meryl Streep has 19. Randy has one more than Meryl. And if I look at the board, there's just Castlevania vinyl releases this month, although the digital formats were released about 2-3 months ago. We've got Wonderstruck for Amazon Studios, who are becoming a large player in the original content business for Amazon Prime, and for theatrical releases, that's a Carter Burwell score. We've done a lot of stuff with Carter, going all the way back to In Bruges and Fur and Anomalisa, Burn After Reading, A Serious Man. So we have a long and robust relationship with Carter Burwell, and we're doing that for Amazon Studios. On the indie side of things, we've got this amazing record for Brawl in Cell Block 99, stars Vince Vaughn, and Craig Zoller, the director of the film, also wrote these soul songs, and he got members of the Tavars and the OJs to actually sing them for the soundtrack. That's really pretty cool. And, there's more. I got LBJ coming up. I've got Alias Grace, which is a Margaret Atwood fictional history Netflix series. Margaret Atwood, of course, is known for The Handmaid's Tale, which swept the Emmys this year. We also did The Handmaid's Tale records. And we've got Lady Bird coming up from A24, which is a John Bryan score, who, of course, John scored Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Magnolia, I Heart Huckabees. We've got a pretty full slate, and I get to sleep in February.
So I got a question for you. Soundtracks, because I worked in the music industry, and the music industry seems to get hot and cold on them. Like The Bodyguard will have that Whitney Houston hit, and then everybody wants to throw a soundtrack out, and then a couple flops will come out, and the industry gets cold again. But it sounds like you guys are experiencing a soundtrack renaissance right now.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know. It depends on who you want to believe, but I think that's. I don't know. For me, it's always kind of been a consistent business. I think it really kind of depends on your orientation. If you're looking at those big pop hits, if you're looking at Guardians of the Galaxy, if you're looking at the Broadway Hamilton album, which would be the current Cats or whatever, there's going to be hits and there's going to be other stuff. Any business, whether you're a punk rock label, a heavy metal label, an EDM label, I think everybody's got, hits, and then you've got, the stuff that, you love and is great and you have to work. And I think that's the same for us. I mean, we've been lucky that, we had Drive in 2010. We had a lot of records in between that and Stranger Things. We did, Moonlight last year as well, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture, got both a Golden Globe and Academy Award nomination for the score. Every year is not a great year. I mean, some years are better than others. It's just nature of business. Like you're saying, it's cyclical. I think the soundtrack business overall, I think the reemergence of vinyl has reignited interest in soundtracks. I think labels like Mondo, Waxwork, Invada, I Am 8-Bit, I think the boutique labels that have kind of really gone back in aggressively mining the vault for classic titles, everything from Jaws to Fight Club. I read a thing last year when we were doing the Drive 5-year anniversary vinyl release that a lot of people seem to credit the vinyl issue of Drive as kind of the dawn of a new era of interest in soundtrack albums. And the first pressing we did of Drive on vinyl, we sublicensed to Mondo, and it was the first license deal that Mondo had done as a music company. Maniac actually was the first record they got to market as a release, but the first license that Mondo did to launch as a music company was Drive. So we have a very kind of, unique relationship with the people at Mondo, in that the music division of Mondo, they were doing T-shirts and posters before that. The music division of Mondo really started in earnest with the first license that we granted to them for Drive.
What's old is new. You bring up Drive and this vinyl resurgence. The soundtracks like Stranger Things, It Follows, The Guest, Drive, they all have a commonality to them, that they're this 80s synth sound, the underlying. It's kind of neat to hear this music come back in vogue, and probably a surprise to a lot of people, and really interesting to see that a soundtrack is the driver of that and not a DJ or a pop band or a rock band. It's literally the opening of a movie or the opening of a show. But I had a question here, because I get vinyl. It sounds warmer. The artwork is fantastic. But I was in Newbury Comics here in Boston, and I saw cassettes on the shelves. What the heck is that about?
I think that the ubiquity of digital platforms, this idea that people have had for a long time, the ubiquity of a celestial jukebox where anything that you could possibly want is available to you at any time that you want, it creates option paralysis. There's never, I think, as ubiquity becomes overwhelming, people are looking for curation. And these legacy formats that didn't have a choice but to curate, I think, people are appreciating that now. You put on a cassette, you let it play through, and that's the singular experience you're having. You're not skipping songs every 5 seconds to see if you're listening to another song. You're not spending more time cruising through playlists and charts looking for what to listen to than you are actually listening to music. The work is done for you. You go on that journey and you let somebody take you there, whether it's putting on a side of vinyl or it's putting in a cassette. And I think that there's a certain, two things. One is the nostalgia of it, but also, if you put a cassette up against Spotify streaming, or a lot of streaming, not to single out Spotify, ironically, cassettes, which were kind of looked at as kind of a inferior garbage product, cassettes, analog format, a decent, well-replicated cassette from a good master on a decent cassette deck sounds better than streaming. It just does. Which is kind of funny for those of us who are around thinking about cassettes as, kind of the disposable format. So I think it's a number of things. I think it's nostalgia. I think it's the curation. I think it's having the physical format. It actually is a portable format. I think it's a combination of all those things. And I think that, when people actually put it on, because it is analog, think that, people actually experience it as being a more robust listening experience.
I was reading one of my friends on Facebook. They posted an update that was basically in Cruxus. I need to go jogging, and I don't want to carry my phone with me. So I'm looking for a device that can play about 4 playlists. And I'm like, an MP3 player? But then, it dawned on me. There's been sort of a Spotification of music over the past couple of years, and of movies too. And I suppose even, Adobe Photoshop and software, where ownership And even the concept of ownership has been removed, and now everything is this subscription model. People aren't buying as many physical products anymore, and you've posted some statistics online that were like a major shift to Spotify, especially in the past year or two. It's incredibly drastic shift. So, they're not buying MP3s anymore. They're not even calling them MP3s. It's completely just this streamification of the world. That's right now. We're going to get there, but let's take a trip in the Wayback Machine to how we got there. I mentioned at the top that I did an internship in 1998, and that was also the same year I ever downloaded an MP3. Napster didn't exist yet, but it was back. Google didn't even exist yet. You go on the browser though. I forget what it was even at the time. It might have been through AOL, and you would type in MP3, you would download it. You never knew what you were going to get. It took a very long time. Then, when I was out of college, I started at the label that we worked at, the indie label. And that is right when Napster hit. I think I was one of the first people to show it to you. And I'm like, hey, Brian, check this out. You can download all these songs. Yeah, like half of them were broken or incomplete or a virus. But, in concept, it was all there. What was interesting about it was at the time, there was a lot of thinking in the industry that, that's just a few college kids in the dorm, or, people love to buy physical albums. People love to buy the product. We know that that's not really the case, but what was your thinking at, pre-Napster? Because you were in the business before, so what was life like before MP3s even happened for you in the business?
Well, I mean, look, we controlled the supply chain, right? So that's the bottom line. We made a product, we knew how many we made, and we knew where they went. If there was a loss of inventory, you would figure out where the loss of inventory was, because that loss of inventory was revenue. So people were stealing or shorting or whatever, it was a very finite problem to manage. Supply side inventory had other problems though that we all battled against. The most common supply side inventory problem was that you would get activity on a particular record. A band would go on tour. I always tell the story, the band goes on tour and they play Boise, Idaho. And, Boise's not the biggest market, and you are trying to get a record into Boise. You're like, hey, this band's going to be playing in your town in 2 weeks. Get the local record stores to stock the record, because when the band plays, people are going to want the record. And the record store would be like, yeah, well, no, I don't know. Never heard of them. Don't know who they are. We don't really care. We've got finite dollars for a finite amount of product, and we've got to roll, product based on square foot inventory roll. And this band we never heard of, we're not buying the product. The band comes through town, they play a sold-out show. There's 2 copies in the record store. The band calls you up. There's no records anywhere because the 2 copies sold. They go to 3 record stores in the town. Nobody's got the record. The band is bummed out. They're angry at you. You call the record stores. The record stores are now ordering the record. They catch all the hype because, 25 people came in from the show to want the record. So now all 3 stores are ordering 25 pieces of the product. So now you've got 75 pieces of a product in a market that only needs 25 pieces, because all 25 people went to all 3 stores to get the product, which nobody had. You ship the 75 pieces to those 3 stores. They sell half of what there was because they don't get it until 2.5 weeks later. You sell 12 or 13 copies over the 25 that you would have sold, but the market now has 75, and they return 50 pieces of product. And then they go, see, told you that this band wasn't happening. That's supply-side inventory problems in a nutshell, right? So what digital did for us, iTunes, legitimate digital services, did for us is they eliminated those supply-side inventory issues. A band plays in Boise, and you can go home and download it. A song plays on Charmed, and you walk into the next room where your PC is, and you download it. The fundamental problem with these digital models, the great thing about them is they could remove supply-side inventory problems, but every problem that they solved was negated by the fact that you no longer had to pay for it.
Yeah, and you bring up such a funny thing, because for Napster, or even pre-Napster, you'd use a search engine, you'd find an MP3 very hard. Napster came around, it was a huge revolution. It finally added peer-to-peer. It made it much easier. It wasn't perfect, but it made finding songs easier than, paying for them, for one thing. And, everyone was putting out fires. The RIA, music industry came around, they killed Napster. It morphs into Kazaa, morphs into Morpheus, and then it goes to torrents, which is just huge game changer, because when you can go on a website, type in Beatles catalog, and in one click, on broadband have the entire Beatles catalog in, 2 minutes? That's for free? That's scary, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a couple things, to unpack going back. Working for me that my rap was, I wasn't worried about digital formats because as human beings, we want to go out, we want to hunt it, we want to kill it, we want to drag it home. And I still fundamentally believe that, which is, I think, proven out in the evidence of the vinyl resurgence, is because people miss that experience of going to record stores, going through the bins, going out into the wilderness, searching for it, finding it, hunting it down, killing it, and dragging it home, right? That is why in the age of digital ubiquity, vinyl has a resurgence. That is why in the age of digital ubiquity, cassettes are making a comeback. I mean, as crazy as it sounds. The thing that is greater than all that, though, is, raw economics. And what you really have through Napster, Kazaa to the Pirate Bay is a fundamental systemic breakdown of regulatory function. During the Napster era, we used to, in the office, have kind of like on Friday afternoons, who can find the most obscure song on Napster. I was like, this is fun. We should enjoy it while it lasts because the cops are going to come in and shut this down. And, it's going to be back to business as usual. By the time we got to 2008, 2009, with the Pirate Bay verdict, right, which really, by that point we had shut down LimeWire, Kazaa, all of these other things. And we were on to the Pirate Bay by 2009. That verdict came down. I couldn't believe that it was, 10 years later, from 1999 to 2009, and virtually nothing had changed. It was a complete and total systemic regulatory failure that created a black market for good. And, how do you compete against, a black market that is essentially not only distributing the same product that you are trying to sell, distributing it for free that you're trying to sell, but they're actually monetizing. Every single illegal download has been monetized. Even back to Napster, people say, well, Napster, they weren't monetizing with advertising, but no, they were 4 months in and they got seed venture capital. I mean, Napster was monetized. It was monetized by venture capital, but it was still monetized because they were looking at a business model. One of the great urban myths about record labels and piracy is that the record labels killed Napster, that they didn't like it and they killed it, which is fundamentally untrue. The truth of the matter is that the record labels, knowing lawyers, at this point I know lawyers who worked on both sides of the Napster deal, or a deal that didn't happen. And the fundamental truth, yeah, I know people that were on both sides of the Napster negotiations when they were happening.
That's a true lawyer.
Well, I mean, there were lawyers on both sides who were now doing other things, right? So I know lawyers that were, one lawyer was on one side and one lawyer was on the other. So I now know lawyers that were on both sides of the Napster negotiations. And the truth of the matter was that, Napster was, we'll give you half. And the labels were like, you got to do better than that. You got to give us 70% or 80%. You can keep 20, but you can't keep half. And Napster was like, we get half or no deal. And they went round and round, and Napster wouldn't budge, doing any better than 50%. Couldn't get Napster off of 50%. And the labels finally said, well, look, we don't want, we can kind of see where this is going, but we have to make an equitable deal. And Napster basically said, you got no leverage because either we're going to get half or it's going to happen anyway and you're going to get nothing. And the label said, well, we'll see about that. We'll see you in court. And, fair enough. They shut down Napster, but there wasn't a larger legal or legislative mechanism to combat what was going to happen next, which was all the other Napsters. So systematically and methodically, you moved from a Napster-like company could not exist. LimeWire could not exist. Kazaa could not exist. And then you move to the Pirate Bay. And then you get to torrents, and then you have a whole nother kind of, you have a whole nother kind of ecosystem of what is it? Is it a protocol? Is it a distribution mechanism? How do you regulate or legislate this? And, look, the tech companies have run a really, really good ground game on convincing people that the inability to share the Beatles catalog is an infringement of your First Amendment rights to free speech, which it's not, but they ran a really good ground game getting people to buy in that. The irony is, today, as we sit here having this phone call, the wheels are kind of running off all these arguments on Capitol Hill because of fake news, Russian meddling in elections, white supremacist sites at Cloudflare. Oh, you really can monitor what's going on. It's really not dumb pipes. It's really not ambivalent systems running autonomously. There really is a way to govern and control the same way that we govern and control broadcast media, the same way that we govern and control traditional distribution media. There really is a way that this can be done if there is the political will to make it happen. But nobody cared about rich rock stars or the perception of rich rock stars.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it sort of ties in why I thought you'd be such a great guest here. And there is this public perception. When this battle was going on, the record labels were, presented in the media, on blogs, and everything. It's public enemy number one. The record labels are bad. And a lot of people also looked at it too, and they go, well, that's the record industry. That's their problem. This can't happen to me. Then you mention the Pirate Bay. That comes along, and hey, guess what, film industry? Someone can download your movie now on broadband in 5 minutes. So now you got a problem too. And then the medallion, the tax industry comes in. Now there's Uberization. And even in my industry now, people look at these tech companies that are coming around with disruptive technology and like, oh, that's cute. Let's see if it goes anywhere. Instead of, oh my God, this aggressive invading force is coming in. We either have to get on board with it or figure something out, because things are about to change and change rapidly.
I mean, it's over for everybody. I mean, like, look, self-driving cars are, self-driving trucks or self-driving trains or self-driving planes or self-driving ships are, automation, AI, everything that we understand about the world is about to radically change. And then you have to ask yourself, what are our values as a society? Because the thing that happened with Napster and the record business and then the film business following it and is now going to happen to the TV business, everybody has the same rap as this stuff is happening. It's not my problem. You guys were selling buggy whips, sorry. And that would be true if somebody wasn't actually monetizing the same product. The buggy whip analogy doesn't work because it's like somebody else is making buggy whips, and has it, you know what I'm saying? It's like it's not the buggy whip. People are still consuming music; they're just not paying for it. It's a regulatory and systemic failure of legislation to protect our values and not allow black markets to exist. These are human issues. We live in a human world. Computers aren't doing anything. It's not like Google is like the weather. Engineers write code. They build systems. There is an intention. That intention is to create profit for the winners and to create as much revenue as they can for the shareholders until they are stopped. And this is what happened with railroads, right? This is what, has happened throughout history going back to feudalism. Power is always taken, it's never given, right? So if you go back to feudalism, it's mine until you can take it back, right? And that's exactly where we're going. The Wild West wasn't wild forever, and I don't really, at this point, know how this stuff is going to play out over time, but I can tell you that large economic interests are going to dominate the top of the pyramid, and before everybody else is up to speed, just looking at the music business, we were complaining about stuff, and the MPAA in the era of Napster could have helped the record industry pass legislation that would have protected everybody. But the MPAA didn't come to the rescue of the RIAA because you can't download a movie yet. And so here we are, and then we're seeing the same thing play out. The broadcast TV people are like, our model is already based on making it available for free and selling advertising. Right, your model is based on making it available for free and you selling the advertising. What happens when there's 1 million knockoff IP streams, hello Cody boxes, that are either making it available without monetization? There's always monetization in it somewhere. Somebody is profiting somehow from the distribution of these copyrighted works.
Would it be fair to say for a little while, though, there wasn't a marketplace to facilitate it because this was new. This was a new frontier. There was a lot of fighting between the RIAA, between record labels, between who set up a service until, iTunes came around. What was that battle like? And has iTunes been a benefit to the music industry?
Look, I got the pitch from Steve Jobs directly. They had after they did the deal with the major labels, they invited up a handful of independent labels to Cupertino. It was a small auditorium up at Apple. I don't know, maybe it was 100 people total in this small theater. And we got the pitch from Steve directly, and he came out and he said, look, you're screwed. You're not going to get less screwed. You're going to get more screwed. But when you walk out of here, if you sign the non-disclosure agreement that my staff is going to have you hand out to you when you walk out the door, we'll send you a non-negotiable contract, and maybe you'll be less screwed. But you are screwed, and it's just a matter of time until you're completely screwed. And I'm just trying to slow it down a little bit. Have a good day. My guys are going to explain to you how it works. That was the pitch.
Wow.
That was the pitch that we got from Steve directly. And I was like, yeah, okay, I'm signing on. The Apple years, which I'll say for me were 2004 to 2008, maybe 2004 to 2010, were really good years for us. It gave people who had the interest in being good people an ability to have a product and integrate it and ingest it into iPods and devices, and it worked. And it was, for a lot of people, it was better and easier than piracy. The people that were going to pirate for the sake of piracy were going to do it anyway, but for the consumers that wanted to have that experience and didn't want to get down into the weeds of searching for stuff and figuring it out, and you were all going to put it in your iTunes anyway, and it was all going to end up on your iPod anyway, a lot of times, it just was easier. Pay the $10 and get the record. And so Apple was great. I think that a lot of people misunderstood Apple's position and there was a lot of resistance to breaking the bundle of an album and selling songs individually, but that wasn't Apple's mandate, and Apple didn't dictate it. Steve said, look, I know that you guys are really unhappy about this, but they're going to get songs individually anyway. So you can either sell songs for 99 cents or not at all. And, we're not going to create a service that doesn't give people what they want. So if you want to be on our service, you got to sell songs individually. And people were really upset about it because it changed the fundamental economics of how records worked. But once it happened and they were forced to do it, they figured it out. Streaming is a different issue because there's nothing wrong with the technology of streaming, and there's nothing really wrong with Spotify. The fundamental problem with the subscription streaming service is that you have a capped market. If there was a set price per stream, like any other good, and there was a transactional quality to it, where you had a minimum price per stream, you had an upcharge for the streaming company, and the revenues were distributed at the same ratio and proportion that they have been traditionally, then you would have the ability to have streaming models that are sustainable. I think it remains to be seen. I think people are really drunk on streaming right now because it's, when you're starting at zero, everything's a positive number. But eventually that market is going to flatten, and you're going to have to grow revenue. And I think that, Spotify is in a position right now where they're trying to get to an IPO before the market flattens. Because, again, starting from zero, everything looks like growth. If it didn't exist last year and it exists this year, you only have to make $1 to show growth, right? So what really happens is there the ability from a pure market cap point of view to meet or exceed the historical revenues that were possible in 1999? We know how many dollars are available in a global market for consumption if all of the consumption can be monetized. We know what that looks like. It was $14 billion domestically, and I think maybe $30 billion worldwide in 1999. And that had to build in 10% of that was shrinkage or unmonetized goods that got lost or sold or whatever. So the question is, for all the hype on streaming, can you get to $14 billion domestically in monetizing consumption of music products with this model? And I'm skeptical, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's possible. There's other problems with the business model from a flat revenue cap model is that it favors people weighted at the top. It doesn't necessarily allow a small band that was going to sell 10 or 15,000 albums to have the same kind of revenue potential that they would have because it's so heavily weighted towards the top because you're pulling out of a finite set of dollars.
Can you break that down quickly, just sort of into real-world numbers? Like, for example, if a band sold a record back in the day, how much would they get for if you even broke it down even more to one track verse, if someone streams a song now?
Yeah, say a band sold, 1,000 records. Let's just say that a band sold 1,000 records back in the day. They would probably make, depending on how their record deal was structured, they make somewhere between $2 and $3 a unit on a CD from 1999. That would be between $16 and $18. They would make between $2 and $3 a unit. So if you sold 1,000 units, you'd make $3,000. If you sold 10,000 units, you'd make $30,000, right? So 1,000 albums makes the band about $3,000 at their royalty rate. At current rates, they'd probably need, at 20%, probably somewhere around 5 to 7 million streams.
Wow. But nowadays, if you can get 1,000 streams, is that $1 even? Is it less?
Oh, it's way less. Right now, the gross payable out of Spotify right now looks like it. I mean, we never really know. You can only get these numbers by taking the aggregate number of streams and the aggregate number of dollars and dividing them. And, different people have different numbers based on the weighting of the stuff that they have and whether or not it's premium subscription paid or if it's ad rev, and then you're, aggregating everything else. But it looks like at the moment, Spotify might be somewhere around a half a penny per play, a half a cent per play, which is going to be about $5,000 gross per million plays, right? Figuring that an artist probably on the high end maybe gets 20% of that, that's $1,000 per million plays, right? So if a band is going to make $3,000, I guess it's 3 million plays, right? The band is going to end up with $1,000 per million plays.
Last year, the CEO of a 3PL, a third-party logistics company that I was working with, say to me, his logic was that as a non-asset-based 3PL, people use them as a service provider. But what I was trying to express to him was that their product is a service, and that is entirely assailable by technology because there's nothing going on in here that couldn't be automated. My question was, when these tech companies came in, like Spotify came in, or you mentioned Apple, when they get enough power, you lose all the leverage, right? I mean, they just take it.
Yeah, I mean, that's, look, they're yes and no, because the only leverage that we ever have is to withdraw our products from the service. Problem is, by the time somebody has market dominance and people want to withhold their products, you kind of get into, if more than one person does it, you have to look at that and see if it's an FTC issue, if it's, collusion. Apple was kind of getting into that issue at one point in time with the labels, and it kind of backfired a little bit. I think this is around the time that the Amazon MP3 store was launching. And so, the labels have made these deals with the streaming companies. Spotify is the new Apple. They've probably got 80+% of the streaming market share. They're the dominant market leader. Apple's number 2. Somewhere down in there, below Apple is Deezer and, Google Play. And that gives you your top 4 streaming companies. Amazon is getting more aggressive. Remains to be seen what Amazon's music streaming model looks like in terms of volume versus revenues. There's no doubt in my mind that everything is streaming. There's 2 fundamental realities that are going to emerge, in my opinion. One is that, all media content will be streaming or subscription, including applications like Photoshop and Pro Tools and whatever, right? The physical analogy to that is automation and AI. I think it's a question of time before I don't think anybody's safe. My wife is a psychotherapist. I believe that there'll be AI psychotherapy. Modern doctors' offices are working off of... I believe it's true. Yeah, you won't know the difference. It'll pass the Turing test. Psychotherapy, modern psychotherapy is based on rules. It's based on observable, replicable rules. Behaviors are, people act out behaviors based on certain conditions. All of a psychotherapist is the embodiment of knowledge and experience of how people's experiences shape their behaviors, right? And helps them untangle that so that they can change their behaviors and have better lives. That can be automated. That's input-output. That can be automated. Doctors will be eliminated. If you go to a modern doctor's office, everybody's got a prompter in their doctor's office now, unless, you've got a really old doctor. But modern Doctors' offices are now collectives. They have these portals. They put in your symptoms, and then it kicks back, what it could be, what medications to give you. A lot of modern, general practitioners are working on basically an automated survey machine. Anybody who thinks that anything outside of personal expression is not going to be automated is out of their minds. Anything that you can write rules for, including art. Computers will write poetry, they will write songs. There will be AIs that, you plug in 15 songs that you love, and it'll give you 15 more that you love that are for you. Okay, for you. And I know that upsets a lot of people to think of that. Okay, and the only thing that will matter at the end of the day is whether or not you believe it's coming from a human being or it's coming from a machine. But without you actually knowing, there's no distinguishable difference.
People always kind of think that it's far off, but to go back to film, you can tell on Friday how much a movie is going to make over the weekend. I mean, I guess people have freedom of choice, and something terrible could happen that could make them not go, but the music industry has been predicting that stuff for decades, right?
By Saturday morning, we know within a certain margin what the lifetime earnings on a film are going to be. Generally speaking, by lunch on Saturday, everybody knows within a 20% margin what the lifetime revenues of any film is going to be.
You've survived, and you personally have survived through all.
Nobody's going to survive. Nobody is surviving. Nobody is going to survive. Nobody is going to survive. Silicon Valley billionaires are building bunkers for the backlash. Okay? Either we're going to figure this out. Nobody is going to survive based on market economics. We are post-capitalism. We are post-capitalism. You either instate a government, legislation, regulations, and policies that create a society values to which these technologies and companies are a service to the public good, or we don't. We've entered Blade Runner, right? It's just a tool, Mr. Deckard. Whether it's used for good or bad depends upon, what you do with it, right? We are now Blade Runner. The event horizon for what we're looking at, I probably see it in my lifetime, okay? I mean, I think 20, 30 years, we're going to see the level of disruption in all industries that is probably unimaginable to most people. The only thing that I hope is that my Social Security is still there and the economic markets don't collapse. But, I mean, we're probably going to see it. I mean, you're younger than me. You're going to see it in your lifetime. I mean, it's inevitable.
Brian, we'll both be out in the wilderness, living like the road.
Maybe.
Brian, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I found it incredibly insightful. Always great to catch up with you, and I think it'll be of great benefit to my listeners. All right, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I'd like to thank Brian for joining us. That was left on a bit of a somber note. A little T2 action, Rise of the Machines. But even if you're not as concerned, and you're not building your fallout shelter like Brian may be, heed his warning. He knows more than anybody what digital disruption can do to your industry, and how tech can come in there and take it from you. I don't care how long you think you've been established. Especially if you are not asset-based. If you're just service-based, a better service can easily come along and take that business from you. Thank you for joining us on episode 3. Go back and listen to our last 2 shows. We had on Jill Carney on episode 2 to talk about the difference between 3PLs, 4PLs, and consultants. In episode 1, we had Percy Pine on to talk about the Jones Act and intercoastal shipping. What's old is new again, the freight subway system. You can find all of our episodes at theshippingpod.com. Season 2 and Season 1 are both there. We're also on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Overcast, TuneIn, and everywhere podcasts are heard around the world. If you'd like to reach out to me, info@theshippingpod.com. Love to hear from you. If you'd like to be a guest, I'll be happy to take your booking. If you enjoyed today's episode, there are 2 ways to give back to the show. Simply go on iTunes, subscribe, rate, review. It's a big help. And it'll keep us the highest rated logistics podcast on iTunes. And I can keep saying that. Or head over to our Patreon. Patreon.com/theshippingpod. Patreon is a site that allows you, the listener, to donate in any tier amount that you'd like to the show. That is patreon.com/theshippingpod. See you all in a couple of weeks. This has been Tim Dooner for The Shipping Pod.
Digital, metaphysical, carbon copy, originals, unpredictable, stereotypical individuals, unforgettable visuals, minimal out of principle. Glitch critical, switch flips to digital. Graphic attacking it, and splitter tracking it. Back-to-back action hits, full metal jacketed. Lethal weapon packing, literary masochist. Digital hologram and Michael Jackson can't get as bad as this. Ones and O's, endless lines of code. Artificial intelligence, GPS in your phones. Remote control drones that roam the ozone. And chemical seed zone, make clones that's homegrown. Facial recognition, scan your fingerprint and retinal. Catalog the profile and upload the decimals. Like, share, and follow as much as you can swallow, cause the food produces hollow and it's mostly just inedible. Incredible advances, technologically, and most of drinking water we consume will leave your body weak. About a week later it's lobotomy. Express deliver about what you just ingested bodily. Robotic bionic speak, reach to greet you solemnly. $1 million man that paid for his new biology. Guess my heartbeat, charted out the column beat. No health insurance, medical billing, collectors calling me. You'll pay a wealthy price, you can pray for healthy life. Otherwise your life stand the same chance to melt and ice. Assimilate or die, it's a digital divide. We'll be living on the ground when the Jetsons hit the sky. Digital, metaphysical, carbon copy originals. Unpredictable, stereotypical individuals. Unforgettable visuals, minimal out of principle. Glitch critical, switch flips to digital. 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 Body reanimated, genetically annotated. The water contaminated with illnesses that predated the modern medicine man. So give us medicine, man. But side effects listed can and will leave sedative strands. Contacting capillaries while damaging salivary glands. Man, you stand no chance, but symptoms vary. Be very wary what they're putting in the dairy too. When beverages very rarely don't carry some sort of scary flu. Modified genetics, edit bodies, roll the credits. Co-robotic hands replacing your paramedics. This really real life, not just reading views on Reddit. Companion cyborgs with human facial kinetics. Artificial aesthetic, full body prosthetics. Attraction is magnetic, catch eyes and turn headeds. The direction that we're headed in. Microchips embedded in, heads needle threaded in. The method that they spread it with. Not talking vaccinations either, take a breather. They'll greet you with the sweet release that feel like breathing ether. Wake up fully modified and you'll be a believer. Order up, next in line to meet the surgeon's cleaver. Presently and future, past imaginations, limitations. Only limit on your new fixation. Credit limit payments, promise of a future and it turn into a threat when tomorrow isn't promised if you can't afford the debt. Digital, metaphysical, carbon copy originals. Unpredictable, stereotypical individuals. Unforgettable visuals, minimal out of principle. Glitch critical, switch flips to digital. Digital.